Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, and who is Harrison Sawyer?
Hello, people of Earth. I'm Alton Gansky, the Dr. Watson to Aaron's Sherlock Holmes. I'm the author of about 50 books, most of them novels.
I'm Molly Jo Reilly, and I don't have an awesome introduction, but I do have an awesome cookbook called The Unemployment Cookbook, and I'm currently working on an awesome mystery called NOLA.
So, Pops, I'm not sure if I should be flattered by you calling me Holmes or if I should be a little offended that you think I'm so narcissistic and crazy, but I'll be flattered instead. So thank you.
And
for
drug
that.
addicted.
Yeah, but you are the one who has the doctorate degree, so I guess that counts for something.
Not much. Hey, Aaron, what
Yes.
is that you were holding up?
Oh,
I see Aaron D. Gansky, Who is Fingers?
who's
Oh, there you go.
I didn't even realize I was holding this up. Must be reflex or something. I got this in the mail. I was a little excited about it. There's something about, the new smell, and I enjoyed our cast last week where we got to talk a little bit about how the process of that coming to be, and I think that's one reason why I feel a little more connected to this book. I feel like I'm a little more excited about the release of this book than I have been other ones. So many of you have already purchased it. Thank you. Those of you who have shared on social media that you picked it up, thank you very much. Could always use some reviews, and of course, an author's best friend are readers who can do reviews for them, honest reviews. Even if it's not a 5-star, just an honest review is going to be helpful. So thanks for that. Pops, how's Finder's Fee going?
It's moving along. I was just going to say that I just got your book. It came in a day or two ago, and I put out real cash, even though I am a family member, and got the ebook also. So
if you've waited long enough, I know a guy.
I know a guy.
I might have been able to hook you up with a freebie, but
I'll take his copy.
I wanted to contribute to the cause, so
I appreciate that. Thank you very
cover
much.
on that. Finder's Fee is going along, as well as the other 9 books I have up at my website. So no news to report on that, other than to say I've finished the edits on the most recent Harbinger book, which comes out on Halloween. It's called At Sea. Yeah, and I really ticked the characters off. They don't talk to me anymore, so. But it comes out on Halloween, and did the last roll of edits on it. Went over those, so it's up and up for pre-sale. So you can, buy it, and they'll send it as soon as Halloween gets here.
That's some clever marketing, by the way. Releasing on Halloween, a spooky book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was working on it. I thought, yeah, we could do it on Halloween, and that would give me another week or 2 to work on it. So. Yeah, there's a little selfishness involved.
All by design, of course. All by design. You planned it this way.
Right.
No selfish motives at all. So, well, we do want to remind those of you listening to the audio-only version broadcast, or if you are watching on our YouTube channel, you can watch us live, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Best place to do that, aarongansky.com. There is a link there for Firsts in Fiction Live. Go ahead and click on that. The cool thing about watching us live is you can participate in the chat room. You can say hi. You can ask questions. There's some good conversation going on. Molly keeps things going in that chat room. She's really great at that. And just really love having you guys involved. Hearing from you, getting that immediate feedback is real positive for us. It means a lot to us. Those dedicated listeners who show up week in and week out, we thank you very, very much for that. If you are unable to make those times and you do watch on YouTube or audio later, please make sure that you rate us in whatever podcast program you're using and give us a thumbs up on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. That always helps us out as well. So appreciate all of that. Now,
can I interrupt you for a quick second?
Sure.
The beauty of having this now on your website is that at the top of the chat room feed, there are buttons that you can share right now. You can click to tweet, to like it, and it'll post to Facebook, and give us a thumbs up on Google+. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 people in the chat room. So if you could each hit those 3 tabs, then we've got 12 notifications that are going out, boom, that fast. And if you can do that every week, then we're going to start gaining an audience.
Thank you. See, Molly, you're just so much smarter with that stuff than I am. That's why I hire you, because I put this website together and I didn't even know that. So you're the social media guru. So
I would like a tiara, please, diamonds, and
it's in the mail. It's not in the mail, but if I order it on Amazon fast enough, it will be. So
okay, good
all
enough.
right, I'll keep that in mind, and I'll set it on a plate or something.
I was just going to say either that or a plate.
Yeah. Well, our Ask the Author this week comes from Andy Clapp, who is a dedicated listener and just an all-around classy guy. So he asked us last week when we were talking about the release of Harrison Sawyer and the process that from publication or from concept to publication with that. He asked this. He said, do Aaron, Alton, and Molly find that when they are passionate about an idea, that they have a sense of urgency to get it on paper, at least the bones of the project? And because we talked last week about how I'd had the idea, the concept for Harrison Sawyer for about 8 years before I actually wrote the thing, finished writing it at least. I'd started it in a bunch of false starts and never finished it. But it kind of kept hounding me. So Andy, thank you for this question. A great question. I'd say, yeah. If I'm passionate about something, there is a sense of urgency. But the way that I do that, because I'm very meticulous, I like things in order. You wouldn't know it by looking at my desk, but everything is in its proper place, which is, underneath all the other piles of other important things. But there is a rhyme to my reason. There is a method to my madness, and I am meticulous. So if I've got a project that I'm passionate about, I often use that as a carrot on the string. And that's my motivation to finish whatever it is I'm currently working on. So right now I'm really itching to finish the Hand of Adonai series because that's been on my heart. That's a passion of mine. Nearing the end of it now. The end is very much in sight, which is exciting and also terrifying all at the same time. But I'm eager. There's that sense of urgency to finish this, polish it up a little bit so that I can get back to this science fiction concept that I have that's been eating at me since probably for the better part of a year. I've just, it's been in the back of my mind. I've never tried science fiction. I did a proposal for it this summer, and that's when I really fell in love with it. I find when I do proposals for projects, when I tend to get the wider scope of a novel in my mind, that's when the passion really comes around, and that's when I start to get very eager about working on it. And so right now I'm really looking forward to that. The advantage to doing the proposal is I've got something on paper. I actually wrote the end of the science fiction novel. So I've got the first few chapters and the final chapter, which again is, I'd say it's uncommon for me, but the last two books have worked out that way where I've done the ending first. But for me, that's enough. That's enough to kind of satiate that, that drive, so that I can finish up the project I'm currently working on. And then I've got that carrot on the string. And I'm telling you, once I finish Hand of Adonai and start work on that science fiction project, I'm going to take a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks just to dream up some more ideas, because I always want to have something in the works. I always want to have something beyond the novel that I'm currently working at, because at least for me, Pops, I don't know if this is true for you, but there's nothing more terrifying than not knowing what I'm writing next. That is the stuff nightmares are made of for me. Seeing an end in sight and going, wow, what do I write when I'm done? Find that chilling. I hope that answers your question, Andy. What do you think, Pops?
Well, I agree with you about that last part, because I'm in that position right now, and it's for a writer not to have a brand new project to jump right into, you end up feeling lost. I'm wandering around on the streets at night, wondering what in the world am I going to do? And where I live, you don't want to do that, so you don't want to be out at night.
You're grabbing homeless people by the raggedy coat. Tell me your story.
I was thinking when you said everything has its place, I was thinking about your mom. I wanted her to read one of my manuscripts, and she said, "Where is it?" And I said, "It's right where it's supposed to be. It's in its proper place." So she went to the trash can, and I just...
Well,
but I'm ding. Moving on here. Yeah, Andy, passion is one of the for a project is one of the things I look for to see whether or not I think the idea is good. Does it have lasting power? Because especially if you're doing book length work, you're going to be with this thing for a long time. It's quite a long marriage, months and months, and for most people, sometimes years, as they work through that book idea. So you have to have a passion for it. My only warning is passion is an emotion, and emotions come and go, and things can change them any number of ways. So sometimes you'll be working on a project and the passion will just be gone. And writers want to know, what do I do then? Well, you keep writing is what you do, and the passion will start coming back. So don't just depend on it. Passion puts my butt in the chair, but it does not sustain me through the whole process. It's the idea of telling the story and making it work and being a professional that keeps me going. So passion needs a good partner, and it's called commitment. The discipline to carry out your project till it's completed. And when it's done, then you've at least done something that most people have never done. You've written your book, or you've written your story. So it may not be that demanding for short works, short stories and the like, but it certainly is for book-length work. Molly.
Me. Yes, I'm extremely passionate about everything, and I do put it on paper immediately. My favorite quote is from Isaac Asimov. He said, "I write for the same reason I breathe, because if I didn't, I would die." And that expresses me to a T. When I hold on to something, okay, can we just, Aaron, you're super distracting with this background thing. I don't know what you're doing, but it needs to stop.
All right. How do I turn it
so
off?
Back to me. And yes, absolutely. It doesn't mean I write the entire manuscript, but I will keep folders of notes and ideas to return to. As soon as I get an idea, I find that I'm constantly getting nudges to write things down and to keep notes. And I'll tuck them away if it's not my current project. But if it is my current project, I can't wait to stop everything else in life and get back to the laptop and write some more on it. And right now I'm about 2/3 done with NOLA, and my next book is already starting to really haunt my thoughts, and I'm getting just as excited to start the next book. So I have even more passion to finish NOLA as soon as possible for the aspect of having it done, but then also so I can start my next one.
Yeah, I remember when I had the idea for the science fiction novel, I immediately had to write it down, and I did about a paragraph outline of what I wanted it to be. And I didn't have a full idea, but I had enough. But I did put it on paper. I saved it in a document because that's what I do. Because I knew otherwise it may not stick with me, but it did. I've never had to go back to that document. But I tend to have these fleeting ideas, and so I'll try and copy them down, put them down on paper, and then try and combine some of them to come up with ideas if I'm short. But this one was a little more fleshed out, and so I liked it, and I had the vision, I had the image, that central image that Flannery O'Connor talks about, and kind of latched onto that and wanted to experiment with that. So Molly, I don't know if on your side you can do the Google effects, but I've found so many things to really keep us at a professional level here. All right.
I quit. I quit.
You quit? No, you have to do.
This is actually. I will. It's going to be really fun. Before we get into sidetracking on all the neat things we can do to annoy our audience, I do want to say thank you, Andy, for that question. But also, it is his 8th wedding anniversary today. So,
oh my goodness, what is he?
He is here in the chat room with us. So thank you,
That's
Andy.
dedication.
We appreciate you.
You've been married 8 times?
I'm sorry, that is annoying. I'll stop.
No, I think I really want. Oh, look at. Oh, there's. Wait.
Uh-oh. The rabbit hole. What were you saying, Pops?
I said, wait a minute. He's been married 8 times?
Yeah.
No, I don't think that's what I said.
Oh, well, you said it was his 8th anniversary, so.
Anyhow.
Happy anniversary, Andy.
Happy anniversary.
I have my tiara.
Hey, there it is. So we do.
For those who are just on the audio only version, for some reason, people are playing with the backgrounds on the video. So you'd have to watch the video for any of this to make sense.
This is what happens late at night. We get tired. It's not even late for us. It's 6:45. It's 9:45 for you East Coasters, but we work long days. All right, moving on. Shall we get to some actual content? What do you think? Maybe something educational instead of just silliness? All right. We are resuming our conversation about voices now. If you listened to our previous cast, it was a little bit different. The cast before that, we introduced the idea of voices. And we mentioned that it's perhaps the trickiest aspect to master in terms of fiction. Most writers work for years until they can really find their voice. Really, when we say voice, what we're talking about is a culmination of personal style. We can read sections of novels and know immediately who wrote it based on their voice. Okay, this includes things like vocabulary, their use or non-use of adverbs and adjectives, their types of sentences and varieties of sentence structures, etc. And really, writers will try and find their sweet spot, which is going to be some hybrid of the voices that we've already discussed, and the two more, we're going to discuss two different types of voices tonight. And really, your voice is not going to be one of these. It's going to be the combination, your particular combination of these. Maybe it's 10% this, 20% that voice, 50% that voice, etc. How you move between the voices is another element of your voice. There's no right way or wrong way to do things, but it is really very much a very subjective in a lot of ways. Voice is, but some people are just, they have a voice that you like. It's like singing. You read books that you just really enjoy the voice of the author. You listen to singers whose voice you really admire. So that's what we're talking about. The final two types of common voices. We'll talk a little bit about how to move between them, when each one is used, and how you can best make use of them in your writing.
I think of it as a golfer working to get his swing down. I'm not a golfer. I've just never been attracted to the sport, but I do know golfers, and they develop their proper swing by hitting the ball a few thousand times. And that's how they develop what they need, and they get the muscle memory. And it becomes the way they approach the ball and the way they do it. Same thing with a pitcher. You know, we're in baseball playoff time, and if you watch the different pitchers, you'll notice they don't all pitch the same. Some throw really hard and fast, others are slow and they finesse, and they find what works for them. And that's in essence what we're talking about, is your personality will come out in your writing, and that's your voice. And sometimes the only way to find that is to start writing and writing and writing, like the golfer practicing the swing or the putt, the pitcher, and so on. And that'll lead you to the voice. It will just kind of show up one day, and then you'll know it'll feel right to you.
It's a really good way of saying it. And I hate to speak of it in such ethereal terms of it will feel right to you. But it's kind of like knowing when you fall in love. You get there and you go, yep, that's it. And I would say that you're probably not going to notice it when you're writing. You're probably going to notice when you read back through your own writing and you go, that's it. It's right there. Pops, you make a great example and a great analogy here of golfers and their golf swings. You mentioned to continue writing. I'm going to say continue reading. Read a wide variety of different types of authors, not just in one genre. Read some literary works. Read some commercial works. Read some poetry. Read articles, newspaper articles. They still have those, right? Newspapers?
Yep.
I think they're all online now. Yeah. Okay. All right. One or two. So just get a sense for how those things are done. And the more you read, the more, the wider variety you read in, the more types of voices you're exposed to, and the more chance you have of discovering your own voice is kind of how I think of it. So practice your golf swing, but also watch golf. You know, practice your writing, but also read. Does that make sense? We good with that?
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
What do you say to people who say that they're too busy writing to read? I would never. I have never ever said anything like that, but I might have heard it a few hundred times come out of my mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to think that too, but then again, I go back to the sports analogy. I mean, what great football player does not watch football? What great baseball player does not watch baseball? I'm a great baseball player, but I never watch it. Well, what do you mean? Of course you watch it. Well, who do you watch? You watch the greats. You know, you watch the Dan Marinos because we all know he was the greatest quarterback in NFL history. You're going to watch, you know, Brett Favre's. You're going to watch Tom Brady's. Lori's not watching, is she? Is Lori Roosevelt on?
No, I don't see her in the room.
I'm going to have to destroy this video.
But you watch right now.
Yeah, you watch the greats. And as much as I don't like him, Tom Brady is one of the great quarterbacks. and you learn from them. So if you're too busy writing to read, then you're probably too busy to become a better writer. And I know that sounds harsh, but you're never going to get better on your own. And so one of the ways you improve is by reading. That's what I would say.
Musicians do that. I remember listening to some of the people in great bands, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, some of the others, and you listen to them talk, and when they talk about some of the other great musicians, I mean, they just dote on them. They just have nothing but good to say, and how they would listen to their records over and over and over again. So even the group The Who, they studied blues players, because rock and roll, a lot of rock and roll came out of blues, and they loved those guys, and they had nothing but good to say, and they would study them. And that's how they became great, is by knowing what the greats were doing. And then that doesn't mean, that the Beatles, who loved the blues early on too, became great because they copied the blues players. They didn't. What they did is they found the same kind of passion. They found things that they could use. And so that's really it. You have to read to be a writer. You have to do it. It's not something that you're just doing for enjoyment. We analyze books, and sometimes it's the thing that'll keep you writing, is by reading someone else's work.
I get asked, one of the most popular questions I'm asked is, how do you overcome writer's block? And a lot of times my answer is reading. For me, specifically poetry. I love poetry. It's not I write some poetry, but it's not really what I write. Fiction's more my thing, but reading that poetry is enough just to, like you say, Pops, listening to blues when you play rock and roll. It doesn't have to be the same thing. It's just got to be something that's going to inspire that passion. So good stuff there. Lyrical voice. If we're going to jump back on track here, lyrical voice, this is one of my favorites, and this is something that Fitzgerald used very often. So this is, speaking of poetry, this is very poetic. This is very sensory. Sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, your 5 senses. You're going to really focus on imagery. When you get really crafty, you're going to start focusing on rhythm. You're going to focus on the sound of words. You're going to use words like stone instead of rock, because it has a softer sound to it. So you're going to think about the musicality of this, and I really want to emphasize that when you think of rhythm, think of music. There's a pace to it, and usually in the lyrical voice, you're slowing things down. This is really good for distractions from tense moments, or to heighten silences between two people. They're having a conversation. It's a tense conversation. Give us some description, a paragraph of description, and then we know that it's quiet between these two people for some time. This is good for romantic moments, to really amp up the stakes here. Here's an example from Marcel Proust's Swann's Way. It says, I found it all humming with the smell of hawthorns. The hedge formed a series of chapels that disappeared under the litter of their flowers, heaped into wayside altars. Below them, the sun was laying down a grid of brightness on the ground, as if it had just passed through a stained glass window. Their perfume spread as unctuous and delimited in its form as if I were standing before the altar of the Virgin, and the flowers themselves adorned also. Each held out a distracted air, its sparkling bunch of stamens, delicate radiating ribs in the flamboyant style like those which in the church perforated the balustrade of the rude screen of the mullions of the window and blossomed out into the white flesh of a strawberry flower. So we can all write like that.
Wow.
It is just it's a great passage. And a little later when we talk about metaphor, you talk about a running metaphor, a continuing metaphor. That is certainly one of them, all of them. Really church metaphors, church building metaphors, I should say. Do you know what a rood is?
I used to.
Rood is it's sometimes called a victory cross. And this would come out of a Catholic church, an Orthodox church of some sort, Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, that sort of thing. And it's the image of Christ on the cross, but it hangs usually from a ceiling. And it's very large. It's very large. And so when he talks about the rood, that's what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And they sometimes call it, in fact, I'm trying to find it in this, where is it? Rood. There's the balustrade of the rood screen. They sometimes call it a rood screen. It can be just the cross, but sometimes there's something behind it. So, well, that's your word for the day.
There you go.
You could be on Jeopardy and need that. So
there's gonna be lots of words of the day today. So we're taking a deep dive here. Yeah. Just for, like you say, so many things, and the sound devices, that are used here. And I'm, I've got a bit of a background in poetry, so I kind of eat this stuff up, and it's not something that that fiction writers often trouble themselves with. They may know of them, but they don't spend a lot of time saying, "Oh, am I using alliteration properly here?" But I think that we should. So just in the example here, I'll go through some of these pops. I'll let you kind of handle imagery. Is that all right? Or
sure.
All right. So the sound devices here, the first one is alliteration, which is where you have multiple words. They're usually consecutive, not always consecutive words, but they begin with the same letter or the same sound. Humming with hawthorn. Found it all humming with the smell of hawthorn. So it's a ways away, but those two H's, and then there's a third H shortly after that I'm trying to blank on. Or the foreboding forest, or ancient ambition. Those types of things where you're using the sound, the same beginning sounds, usually soft sounds at the beginning of words. That's going to be alliteration. These sound devices are really rooted in fiction, though. Fiction used to be epic poetry. Before the printing press, way back before paper and pen were easily accessible and readily available, stories were told verbally. And so these poetic elements are rooted in our culture because everything was told in poetry because it was easier to remember. The rhythms were easier to remember. These sound devices served as a way of memorizing these long, complicated tales. And so they still kind of have that impact on us. They still, our ears perk up when they hear it, and we recognize it and go, oh, I see what you did there. So alliteration is good. Assonance is very much like rhyme, but it's not a true rhyme. So here you're going to be repeating vowel sounds. Heave and heel and heap. None of those rhyme, but they all have alliteration and assonance, the repeated vowel sound. Heave and heel and heap, they all have that long E sound there. So even though they have different ending sounds, they still have that kind of repeated vowel sound. So it sounds like a rhyme, even though it's not a technical true rhyme. Then you've got consonants, repeated consonant sounds, clack and clink and clock and block and common. So all of the hard C sounds, that's going to be consonants. You can use those for a variety of reasons, but usually alliteration and assonance are a little bit softer and keep things kind of flowing, whereas consonants is usually a little more punctuated, and so it creates kind of a harder kind of a beat to it. There's a harder break in those types of words, and so you can use those and alternate them between, some consonants and then some assonants and then some consonants, so you kind of get a bump and then a lull and then a bump and a lull, and stringing those together, that's how you start to get your rhythm. That's how you start to get some of that feel, that kind of almost a song type of a feel to it. Onomatopoeia. Now, I've heard this called several times. A lot of people tell me that onomatopoeia is figurative language, and it can be used as figurative language, but just onomatopoeia by itself is not figurative language. It's just a sound word. Bang, woof, quack. Those types of things. Now, if you want to use it as a verb, as I like to do, then it becomes figurative language. You might say something like the lock clacked, closed. Well, clack is not technically a verb, but here I'm using it as a verb. So that's figurative language that describes the sound of the lock closing. His heart cracked. Obviously, his heart is not, it's not a physical crack, but the sound of it makes us think of glass breaking, makes us think of the heart breaking. And so then in those senses, yes, it's onomatopoeia, but just saying the dog woofed, that is not onomatopoeia. That would just simply be, or I'm sorry, that's onomatopoeia. It's not figurative language. It's just simply a sound word. So does that all make sense?
Yes.
I would add to this is be careful in using alliteration in fiction. It does have its place, but you use it with, well, it's like seasoning. You use just enough. Editors will pick up on it. And sometimes you'll get notes back like, well, the alliteration isn't working for me. So if it comes naturally, that's okay. It works better in speech giving, sermons, any kind of public speaking, because it's easier to remember. But do be careful with that. You don't have that much trouble with assonance because even though it may be alliterative, that is, in the example you gave, they all began with H, heave, heel, and heap. It's really the verb sound that gets repeated. So they may or may not begin with the same letter. By the way, same thing with alliteration. It's the sound that matters. It isn't always the letter. Usually, though, the same letter makes the same sound, but there are exceptions, of course, like the letter C, a soft C, and an S, but they can still alliterate. So that's my only warning on that is don't overdo it with the alliteration. And I will mention a book. I used to do book reviews before I realized I shouldn't do them because I'd never written a book. And I felt under conviction about that. But anyway, the guy just alliterated something in every paragraph, and you get 300 pages of that. And it was not successful. It was annoying. It just couldn't stop himself.
You make a really good point here, Pops. I should probably have included that with the lyrical voice, with all of these, but especially I think in the sound devices, there is a high risk of, especially like you say, alliteration, of really overdoing it and calling attention. These should be natural. These should find their natural way into the text. They should not call attention to themselves. I've read several submissions where people have alliterated from start to finish in a flash fiction piece, and every word begins with A, and I start thinking, okay, well, you're cute, but the story's not moving. Like you're having to make too many compromises. Never compromise story for trying to be pretty and trying to show off. Let these be natural, and don't overdo it. You make a good point there, Pops. Thanks.
My pleasure. Imagery, and this is one thing new writers often forget. They focus on action, but they don't focus on using the senses. And remember, your reader will use their senses if you will let them, but you're going to have to prompt them to do that. So when possible, in describing an image or a place, a scene, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, a great paragraph that Aaron read a little bit earlier is filled with stuff like that. That which is seen, that which is heard, there's smell. So that doesn't mean in every scene in the first line you have to have all of those things mentioned. You weave it in to that, but you want people to use their senses because that's how we relate to the world. If we lose our senses, we usually lose our mind. We can't function. So you want to have them in your reading. So pay attention to whether or not you're getting the idea across, whether or not you're drawing the proper image. And the way you do that then becomes part of your voice. So Dean Koontz, for example, almost always has rain in one of his books. And no one describes rain like Dean Koontz describes rain. But he's very good at getting all those senses working for a particular scene. So study some of his stuff. I like his middle work the best of all, but that's probably because I studied them more than I have some of the other books. Then there's this great word. You'll have to go to aarongansky.com to get these notes, so you can get the spelling on this. Synesthesia, which the SYN in that is from the Greek meaning together. Sometimes SYM, symphony, for example, synonym, that sort of thing. We get the same root word on that. But synesthesia describes something experienced with one sense, but in the context of another sense. So you're kind of switching it up. So an example might be the lights in the room dropped an octave. Really? Sound, light does not work in octaves. Sound does. But by mixing those up, you get a more powerful statement. It's obviously a little poetic, a little literary, but the lights in the room dropped an octave. His shirt screeched yellow. Okay, well, colors don't screech. Now, I've seen some shirts that have made me screech, but in this particular case, this shirt screech yellow. Well, shirts don't screech, colors don't screech, but by putting those together, you get a clear picture of what's going on. So you take something that's it should be nonsense, but all of a sudden it makes great sense. Her voice was a pleasing aroma. So, maybe just brushed her teeth or something, I don't know. But we're really talking about the voice. So the sound was like an aroma. So in a sense, it's sort of a hidden simile. Would we say that?
Yeah.
Voice like an aroma?
Yeah, I agree. It is equal parts imagery and figurative language. You're talking about the yellow shirts or the shirt screeching yellow, and you've seen those shirts where it's like the only two things that you can see from the moon is the Great Wall of China and that shirt. I've seen students with those kinds of shirts, and we talk about that. That's a loud shirt. Well, that's synesthesia. We use it in our language all the time, but I find that you can get a lot out of it as long as again, this kind of falls in the same thing with the sound devices. Don't overdo it. If everything is synesthesia, then it gets to be old. It's a tired trick. But I feel like it's one of those that doesn't get used often enough. Not a lot of people really know it. It's one of those hidden treasures. And I can't even remember where I originally came across the term. I think I was in college, but Stephanie Carroll, who's been on our show before, mentioned it at a lecture that she was giving, and I freaked out. I was like, I'm not the only one. I've been validated. Somebody else knows this, and she talks about it. And it's actually a condition. It's a medical condition that people have where they'll try meatloaf and this is too blue for me. Oh, this tastes way too blue. And their confusion of how their brain interprets the sensory details of life. It's fascinating. And I find
I met a person who words had colors. Certain words had certain colors.
Mm-hmm.
So when she was reading, the page was covered in colors.
Is that not normal?
I don't know how to answer that.
So moving on.
Yeah, there are certain sounds that will create numbers. For example, there have been some people who can do enormous amounts of math very quickly in their head, and they don't know how they do it. But when they're facing the problem, the numbers appear before them, and the solution appears. I mean, they see this number appear, and it's a form of synesthesia.
On the Big Bang Theory, they do that. Howard and Kutherpali and Sheldon all sit down, and they're going to try and find a new planet or a new star or something like that. And they're like, this is going to take years. And Sheldon's like, found one. And they're like, what? And he goes, well, it's like when you look at a long string of numbers and all the prime ones are purple and all the even ones are this, and all the ones that are divisible by 14 look like this. And they're like, no. And he goes, huh. And then they just move on. I thought that was great. But so it is an actual condition. It goes a long way. I'm a sucker for a good thing of synesthesia. Put it in. I try and challenge myself to put it in at least once or twice each book, but I again try to consciously hold back because I would definitely overdo it if I could. So you want to dial, kind of rein that in. But with the imagery, I'm going to say think less about sight, think more about taste and smell. Because we focus a lot on what we see and what we hear, and we tend to leave out taste and smell quite often. Tactile sensation, feeling as well. Touch can go a very long way. You walk outside and it's just rained, and you get that smell of the wet asphalt, the wet blacktop, right? Mm-hmm. And immediately you're 7 years old again, walking into second grade. It just happens because smell is so tied to our memory and to our emotions, but it's one of the things that we describe the least in our writing. It makes me a little bit sad. So I would, in the lyrical voice, challenge yourself and dig deep to find those examples of imagery where you can get the most bang for your buck.
And you don't have to really describe what's being seen in detail or being heard in the light. You can do it just by the simple description. So in this next Harbinger's book, At Sea, very early on in the book by character Tank, is confused, but he says one thing that he did know, that somebody had been using his mouth for an ashtray.
Hmm.
All right, so I don't have to,
Wow.
put a paragraph in there saying this is what an ashtray would taste like. Don't need to do that. It's just that one line alone was enough to say that he just had a bad taste in his mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very specific, and that's one thing we haven't mentioned, I don't think, is the quest to be specific. If you go back and you look at Marcel Proust's paragraph, oh, the specificity there. Hawthorne's not just flowers, the white flesh of a strawberry flower. Very, very different than just flower, white flower. It's very specific. Give me, I always do research. What types of trees are growing here? I don't just say, there was a line of trees. What kind of trees are these? What do they look like? And so I always try and be specific with your imagery. The more specific you can be, the better off you're going to be. Please don't worry about, well, what if my reader doesn't know what a birch tree looks like? If you do a good enough job describing it, they probably will, even if they've never seen one. And if not, I don't think the reader's going to be like, I don't understand what a birch tree is. I don't think that's going to take them out of the story. They'll just appreciate the sincerity and the specificity that you're using and kind of continue on. So I could probably talk about this all night, so I should probably get going, huh?
How about figurative language?
Figurative language, good call. So simile is fairly simple. It's a comparison using like or as. The difference between a simile and a metaphor is, the way I say it, is that the way the two things are similar, simile, is listed. So when you say something like, he bounced like a dropped ball. Okay, I've just said, I'm comparing two unlike things, him and a dropped ball. How are they similar? Bounced, right? And so that comparison is clear and apparent. It's right there. It's spelled out for you. The jet dove like a hawk on its prey. So here we've got a jet and a hawk. Different things, but they are doing something similar. In this case, diving, right? Blind, he was as blind as a bat. Him and the bat, how are they similar? Blind. So with a metaphor, and I'm just going to jump down there, here's a comparison not using like or as. It's one of those things where it's, implied, and the reader has to kind of figure it out, but it's usually pretty clear. If you say something like, the two were still in the summer of their love. So, okay, we get that things are hot, passionate, things are going well, but, winter's coming soon. The love has not cooled down in autumn. So we can start taking what we know of summer and applying it to their particular relationship, right? So it's not specifically stated how they're similar. Or you might say, if we want to continue that, he was in the autumn of his life. Okay, so, we know that there's autumn and then there's winter, and then that's pretty much it. And so he's kind of moving toward the end of his life. So this is referring to one thing by mentioning a different thing. Shakespeare, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. It's kind of an extended metaphor that you get from As You Like It. And one thing that I like to do with metaphors is I like to extend them. So rather than just saying it was the summer of their love, give me more, okay? The sun had risen hot and strong in the brightness of their affection and blah, blah, blah. So now I'm just kind of really running with describing summer in terms of their relationship, like we saw in Marcel Proust's, where he was using all of that wonderful language, religious type of language, specific orthodox religious language to describe nature and flowers and all these types of things. We start to make a comparison between nature and religious experiences. One of my favorites from Virginia Woolf, words, 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 how they gallop, how they lash their long manes and tails. Words and horses. I never said horses, but you knew what I was talking about because of the word gallop and manes and tails. I love that. I just really, really like that. Now was the spring of their love, when life was new and breathed deeply, when the smells of new flowers perfumed the air with nectar and honeysuckle, when their lips met like petals on a flower. Just go with it. Just kind of keep going. That's an extended metaphor. And you can get a lot of distance with that. Probably the third most common figurative language is personification, where you give human-like characteristics to non-human things. This is really, really good because it allows us to relate to things that are unrelatable. So if I say something like the angry sea swallowed the sailor, no, it didn't. The sea is not angry. It has no emotions, nor does it have a mouth or an esophagus or a stomach. But when I say that, you go, yep, I get it, right? You envision a sea that is tumultuous, perhaps in a storm. You get the sense that the man is falling deeper and deeper into the ocean, and that there is really no escape. This is death for him. And so those types of simple things can actually go quite a ways to making something come alive, making a description come alive. And then one of my favorites is juxtaposition. And again, this is one where you don't want to go too far with it because it can become distracting, but you can get a lot of power out of what are called compressed conflicts or juxtapositions. This is where you take two seemingly unrelated things and you run them together. From the bargain, I use an example. I say, burdened with the unimaginable weight of nothing. So, well, nothing doesn't weigh anything. So what is this weight that you're talking about? So it seems different. A crushing hope, right? It sounds contradictory, but if you can imagine a situation where that is the case, where you're hopeful, but you don't want to be hopeful because you know that the chances of a happy ending are slim, that might be a crushing hope. The more you hope, the more crushed you become because you know that the hope is unfounded. Living to die, those types of things, where you can take opposite ideas, put them together in a situation that makes sense, can be really, truly powerful. Really, truly powerful. I've got an example here of putting it all together that I just pulled from Ray Bradbury's The Sound of Thunder. So I'm just going to read it. We don't have to analyze it because it would take too long, but at some point, just wow. R.I.P.
I was just reading it. I was just reading it.
Pops, do you want to read it? Do you want to read it?
Yeah, I'll read it, sure. This is from A Sound of Thunder. And as I recall, that's a time travel book where people go back to prehistoric times, Jurassic times, something like that.
Yeah, they're dinosaur huntings. Can I just say very quickly, skip the movie. Don't watch the movie. Please don't watch the movie. Read the book, read the story, skip the movie. All right. Sorry, Pops.
Here's the passage. Now put it all together. It came on great oiled, resilient, strident legs. It towered 30 feet above half of the trees, a great evil god folding its delicate watchmaker's claws close to its oily reptilian chest. Each lower leg was a piston, 1,000 pounds of white bone, sunk in thick ropes of muscle, sheathed over in gleam of pebbled skin like a mail of terrible warrior. Each thigh was a ton of meat, ivory, and steel mesh, and from the great breathing cage of the upper body, those two delicate arms dangled out front, arms with hands which might pick up and examine men like toys, while the snake neck coiled, and the head itself, a ton of sculptured stone, lifted easily upon the sky. Its mouth gaped, exposing offensive teeth like daggers. Offensive teeth like daggers.
Wow.
Man.
That's why he's Bradbury.
Its eyes roiled, ostrich eggs, empty of all expression save hunger. It closed its mouth in a death grin. It ran, its pelvic bones crushing aside trees and bushes, its taloned feet clawing damp earth, leaving prints 6 inches deep, wherever it settled its weight. Sorry for stumbling over that, but I have not read that in a very long time.
Wow. You read it, yeah.
Boy, that's good stuff.
I see Ray Bradbury, just mic drop, just boom,
Yeah, that would be it.
Exactly.
Now, I do want to say, Pops, in interest of preserving kind of this idea of not going overboard, this could be a passage that goes overboard. However, there are other moments like this, but they're shorter and they're sporadic. They're spread out. So there's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of story going on. There's a lot of things happening. But at this moment of heightened senses and awareness and heightened emotional state, I came back in time to shoot this dinosaur, and now, holy crap, it's going to eat me. What is my little gun going to do, right? This state of heightened, this dude is looking at that T-Rex and thinking, I am the dumbest man on the face of the planet to have done this. So that moment demands slowing the prose. It demands, the heightened emotion demands heightened description, I think. And so that's really where you want to focus on it. That's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. Don't overdo it. You don't want to describe the beautiful morning, because if there's no conflict, like there should be some sort of conflict going on, or the beautiful day should just be a backdrop to some sort of silence that's happening between two people or whatever. The heightened emotion is what you're looking for to kind of really break into this voice. I've spent too long on this, and I do want to go to the oratorical voice. And Pops, I'm fairly certain that you could probably do an entire episode on the oratorical voice, knowing what you know about homiletics and delivering speeches and communication and the like. Do we want to try and tackle this tonight? Or do you think maybe we should bump this to next week?
No, I think we ought to go ahead and wind it up here. We have enough time to finish this rather than spend a whole episode on it.
Okay, good. All right. So the oratorical voice is what it sounds like. It's the voice of speeches. You're going to read it, or, you know, if it's old school, like an old school speech, it might be sung. It makes use of contrast. So there, if you look up rhetoric, basic elements of rhetoric, that's going to really play into this. But let's just talk real quick. When would you use these? You would use these if you've got a character that's giving a speech, if they're a politician, if they are trying to convince somebody of something, if they are using elevated language to make their case. There's some sort of disagreement or argument. Think William Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. By the way, probably one of the greatest speeches ever delivered, or at least written, is Mark Antony's speech to Rome, when you have Brutus up there convincing Rome that Caesar, who they just killed, was a bad guy. And so all of Rome is like, but we love Caesar. And then by the time Brutus is done, they're all like, hey, Caesar sucks. We're going to kill all of his friends. And then Mark Antony goes up there as a friend of Caesar, and they're like, we're going to kill you. We hate you too. Well, now Mark Antony has to convince all of Rome that his intentions are good. And that's why he says, okay, making use of contrast, he says, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him, right? And that's how he starts to get the crowd to listen. And of course, by the end of the speech, Rome basically runs Brutus out of town. They are with weapons in hand. They're bloodthirsty. And so Antony uses all of these devices that we're going to talk about and more. I probably should have just put that speech in here. Pretty sure it's common law. What do you call it now? Public domain.
Public domain.
I'm pretty sure it's public domain now. But if you get a chance, look up Mark Antony's speech. Yeah. Old Billy Shakespeare, I don't think is going to be suing for copyright infringement. But, so it makes use of contrasts. It also makes use of parallel structure. So parallel structure is a repeated grammatical setup, but basically the repetition of sentence structures. I have a dream that one day, this and that, that and this. I have a dream that one day, this and that, that and this. So he's got multiple sentences that all begin the same way.
One of the greatest speeches ever.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You analyze that thing. That's just you don't hear many speeches like that.
A lot of this stuff.
That was top drawer public speaking there.
Yeah, I'm a little bit saddened that we don't have the orators like him anymore. Obama's not bad as orators go, but Martin Luther King was.
He's pretty good. Ronald Reagan had some real moments. His first inaugural address, and I think we have something in there from that, was very good. And William Jennings Bryan, of course, that's what he was. He was an orator.
Yeah.
George W. His stuff out loud.
Yeah, George W. had some good ones. He had some stinkers, but he had some decent ones too. So, but it makes use of contracts, parallel structure, lists of three, and you'll see, again, kind of the alliteration is used here as well. Education, edification, and emancipation, listing things in threes. That's a very Western culture thing. You're not going to see that as much in Eastern culture, but Western culture, for whatever reason, we like things with three. If you give somebody a list of two, they go, and then what? And if you give somebody four, they're like, whoa, hold on, slow down. We want 3. You can combine these contrasting things. So you might get something like from Ronald Reagan's first inaugural speech. He says, "We shall negotiate for it, sacrifice for it, but never surrender for it." So you got the parallel structure. We will verb for it, but never verb for it. So the repetition of verb for it is there. And then we shall, right? We shall negotiate for it, sacrifice for it, but never surrender for it. So we've got a list of 3, but it's 2 things that we're going to do, contrast with the one thing that we won't do. And it calls attention to the contrast there, the thing that you're contrasting. So,
and just so everyone knows, the it that he's talking about is peace. The sentence before that talks about the peace. Our enemies know that we love peace, but we shall negotiate for it, sacrifice for it, but never surrender for it. So it's a bit of a warning, a shot over the bow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. Context is everything, right? Best if not overused. Some examples: Charles Dickinson's A Tale of Two Cities. And again, he's trying to establish the hierarchy here, the monarchy, etc. And he's really trying to establish the contrast between the haves and the have-nots in this particular city in London. London?
I think so.
I think it's London. Oh, it's been so many years. Or no, that's Paris, isn't it? Tale of Two Cities. It's about the Paris Revolution. Ah, man, ignorance on. Oh, this is so bad. Okay, well, it's not like I'm a literary major. Literature major. There we go. I majored in writing, not in literature. Still, all right. Moving on. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going directly to heaven. We were all going the other way. And so,
by the way, the brilliant part is he breaks the pattern. Oratorical voice, that's one of the things you do. You build a pattern and then break it at the end. So you would expect we are all going directly to heaven. We are all going directly to hell. But it doesn't say that. We're all going directly to heaven. We were all going the other way. By breaking the pattern, it is now far more memorable.
So now, Pops, I did notice that there are several semicolons in this passage. Did it just throw you out of the story?
Oh, yeah. That's why the book never did well. That's why he failed as an out. No, it's the only way you could write that sentence. Yeah, in fact, I was looking at those earlier, and no, that's spot on.
Yeah. And again, he doesn't use that voice throughout the entire novel. He's establishing, it's the first line, and he's establishing the setting in a very clear way. Ecclesiastes 3:1-8 says, "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to kill. I'm sorry, a time to die, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." And I feel like singing that.
I was just going to ask who else felt like singing.
What is that? Was it the Birds?
We should let people know the Birds did not write that. Now
they didn't write it.
No, they did not write that. It's one of the books of poetry out of the Old Testament. Ecclesiastes. It would have been Solomon who wrote it, not the Birds.
Yeah. Pops, you were speaking of music. You were talking earlier about all these musicians who were talking about listening to their favorite artists, the records of their favorite artists. And I should probably just let some of our newer or younger viewers know records are, you would record music on them. So it's like a CD, but bigger and older. Before MP3 players, you had cassette tapes. And before that, you had old yet, Pops? Because that was kind of the point of this. Oh, okay. It's fair.
Well, nowadays they have turntables and people buy records.
They're all the rage now.
because they're coming back, and it's really quite the investment to do so. It's almost like comic books.
Or
It
typewriters.
is. Yeah.
Or we were all leading the pack before we knew there was a trend to follow.
It's a niche market for sure. So
There you go.
hipsters. All right. Now, moving between voices. Just as your speech changes when your emotions fluctuate, so should the voice change when the tone of the prose changes. So, I speak to my kids one way. I love them. I'm very soft-spoken. I speak to them gently and calmly and rationally until they ignore me 6 or 7 times. And then my tone changes and the way I speak to them changes because my emotions have changed. And that's what you're really wanting to look for is what are the emotions of your characters and what voice is going to best describe that? Are they agitated? Are they feeling at peace and at ease? Are they fearing for their life? Do we need to slow down to the lyrical voice? Is it kind of a moment where things are happening quickly? Here, and this is another point that I'll make very quickly. One of the best stories I've read in terms of describing a car crash came from a story that was entitled, very crazy.
That didn't come through. It was entitled Crash, right?
Car Crash. It was about a car crash. It was called Car Crash by
Wow.
Denton. The most beautiful descriptions of mayhem and horror imaginable. And the language is rough. Just be aware of that. I think the guy's on drugs when he's in the car accident. But you read the passage and you go, this is shockingly beautiful. And of course it's a horrendous thing, but he took the time to slow down, and something that happens very quickly, slowed it down with the lyrical voice to give us those descriptions and had a really profound impact on the reader. Some things that you can try: write the same scene in different voices and see which one is the most appropriate. Which one works the best? Which one sounds right to you? Switch voices. One of the exercises that I give to my students is I just say, okay, we're writing in the natural voice. Start your story. Just a little egg timer, 1 minute, 2 minutes, whatever. And they just write as much as they can. When it's done, okay, chatter, let's go. And then, hey, lyrical, oratorical, let's do deconstructed. And so you get a certain amount of time moving between them to kind of try your hand at it, see which one you like, which one, what impact it has on the reader. That can be a pretty positive way to do it as well. So there's that. Pops, you have anything else?
No, I don't. I think we covered quite a bit tonight. So be sure and get the show notes, which you can get at aarongansky.com.
That's right. Molly, questions, comments, concerns from the chat room?
We had some nice little chat going on. A couple of people in the chat room tonight. We had Therese Moore, Andy, Dave Fessenden. Therese Moore popped in with a couple of quotes from Stephen King. If you don't have time to read, you don't have time or the tools to write. It's as simple as that. And if you want to be a writer, you must do 2 things above all others: read a lot and write a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit about that. I'm trying to scrolling back, other than Andy saying thanks for answering his question. He has another question, and I don't know if we want to answer this now or save this for Ask the Author next week. He asks, how do you improve on imagery? Are there techniques to practice or something that you feel has helped you over the course of your careers? Do we want to do that now, or is that an Ask the Author?
That'd take a little bit to answer.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest answer right now is read a lot, read some poetry. I think that's probably going to be your best bet. Study it. But if we want to get into more depth, we'll probably have to do that. I can put that on the Ask the Author document that we have. And I don't know about next week because we have a few other people with questions that are waiting patiently for us to get to them. But we can definitely put that in the rotation for sure and answer that, if not next week, the following, perhaps.
The short answer is find somebody a writer who's good at imagery, and don't just read it, but study it. Mm-hmm. When you get to a passage that's got a lot of imagery in it, stop, break it down, notice what he does, read it several times, and it'll become part of you then.
Nice.
I'll give 2 other real quick ones. Number 1, overwrite and then cut what you don't need, because your best descriptions are not going to be the first ones that come to your mind. The other thing I say is that originality is 3 deep, meaning your first 2 descriptions, your first 3 descriptions are not going to be very original. You have to really dig and dig and dig until you can find something that's unique to your character, unique to you. And so that's not going to be easy. The easy ones all come first. Write those, get them out of the way, then cross them out, and your 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th or 114th attempt at finding the right description is probably going to be stronger than your 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, etc. So that's what I'll say for now, and we'll put it on the rotation to give a little more time on that.
Nice. Then Therese popped in. She said, Tale of Two Cities, Paris and London are the 2 cities at the time of the French Revolution. So we were right, and we were right. And Andy says, Barnes & Nobles does carry vinyl now for the records, for the collectors.
Excellent.
So,
speaking of Barnes & Noble, December 3rd, Victorville Barnes & Noble. I know a guy who's going to be there signing books. Just throwing that out there.
I heard something about that. I know a guy too.
Yeah. December 3rd is the date. So we'll plug that as
Nice.
the show progresses. So anything else?
Nope, that's it.
That's
Excellent.
it for me.
Well, awesome. Good show tonight, guys. Thanks for listening in. Next week is our wild card episode. You'll know what that's going to be as soon as we know what that's going to be. We've got a list. We just haven't selected one for sure. Don't forget, you can always ask the author. Thank you, Andy. You can also do it via email or at aarongansky.com or on Facebook or Twitter, etc. You can find us at altongansky.com, at franklymydearmojo.com, and at aarongansky.com. So as always, thanks for listening, and until next week, good writing.